Today I'm going to be revealing my best advice for people over the age of 50 who want to build muscle and strength. If you don't know who I am, my name is Harlow and I'm the Over-Fifties specialist physio here at HT Physio in Farnham. And today we're going to be talking all about how to build muscle and build strength over the age of 50. And it's not a myth that you can do this. You absolutely can. You just need to know what you're doing. So I'm going to show you some of my best tips in just a moment. But before I do, I just want to let you know that the advice in this video is not suitable for everyone. Do make sure you get checked out by your doctor before you put anything into action and avoid anything that causes you any extra pain. Anyway, let's have a look at the advice now. So my best advice for building muscle and strength over the age of 50. The first thing we're going to cover is what can you expect? So as an over 50, it's true that the muscle adaptations that you're going to make with resistance training are going to be less than you would have made when you were in your 20s and 30s. That means it is harder to put on muscle size. It's going to take a lot longer, you're going to have to be a lot more committed, and you're going to have to get everything just right if you actually want the muscles to grow. However, that should not be really bad news for you. And the reason for that is that muscle size and muscle strength are not always the same thing. So my first point here, there is a difference between the size of your muscle and the strength in that muscle. And while it takes a very long time for an over 50 to gain muscle size, you can actually build strength very, very quickly. And if you're very new to this is the first time you've used resistance training as a workout method, you will also gain size quite quickly, especially in the first 3 or 4 months. Now, how can muscle size and muscle strength be different things? They're obviously correlated. So if you have bigger muscles, you probably are going to be stronger. However, there are other things that go into the strength of a muscle. One of the big things is something called your neural connection. And that is how well your mind can connect to your muscle to produce the movement. It's almost like the efficiency of your body on that movement. So I have people who come into the clinic, they start off very, very weak. They are really struggling with an exercise. I send them away, tell them to do 10 reps of this exercise a few times a day. They come back in 2 weeks' time, and that same exercise, they were barely able to do it when I saw them 2 weeks ago. Now they can do it for fun. Now, if I look at their muscle, it hasn't changed. It doesn't look any different. It's the same. It hasn't grown, it doesn't look more ripped, they don't look jacked, nothing like that, but their strength has increased dramatically, and it happened really quickly. And the reason that happened is because they've built their neural connection. Now, the good thing about neural connections is that you can build them quickly, and when they start to develop, you're going to be more independent, you're going to be stronger, you're going to feel fitter, you're going to just feel better, you're going to be able to do more of the stuff that you need to do in each day, even though you haven't changed in muscle size. So that's what to expect. So it's absolutely worth people over 50 doing resistance training, even if they struggle to grow bigger muscles. The second piece of advice I have for you has to do with your primary goal with this training regime. So if you're trying to build muscle and strength, what do you think your number one goal should be? Do you think it should be to get really strong? Do you think it should be to see changes in the mirror? I would argue it's none of those things. Now, you're over 50. If you're between 50 and 60, this is important. But if you're over the age of 60, this is doubly important. And this is what I think your number one goal should be. Don't get injured. Now, why am I saying that? Well, I'm saying that because at the age of 20 or 30, if you pick up a muscle injury in the gym, typically you can rest for a couple of days, it feels a bit better, you start light, and then you jump straight back into where you were. Now, when you get to the age of 50, 60, 70 and above, your muscles and connective tissues just don't have the same quality that they had when you were in your 20s and your 30s. So that means that number one, it's easier to get injured in the gym, and number two, it's harder to recover. It's a double whammy. So basically you're losing on both aspects. Now, there's a massive analogy with putting on strength and size with the tortoise and the hare. If you do it very fast and you go all guns blazing, you might start off well, but you're at a high risk of injury. That means you have to take 3 months off. Maybe you'll rupture a tendon or something, have to get it sewn back together. It's an awful thing to happen. And then you're way back, even worse than you were before you started. Now contrast that with a tortoise. You start slow, you build up carefully, you just do things bit by bit, and as you get a little bit stronger, you just slightly push yourself more over time. You're going to avoid that injury, and you're actually going to make much more progress over time. So expect the changes to be slow, but that's going to help you to not get injured. So that's goal number 1, don't get injured. Goal number 2 is to maximize results. So to do the things that you need to do to improve your strength and to improve your muscle size. Now, if you're someone in your 20s or 30s, these goals get swapped around, because although you're obviously not going to want to get injured, it's harder to injure yourself when you're young, and you can recover a lot quicker. Plus, you're in your maximum window where you can maximize your results. So you want to be pushing that envelope harder and harder. But as soon as we get over the age of 50, these things swap around. So don't get injured is your number 1 goal. And that brings us on to our next point. And that is you must warm up thoroughly. Now, when I was in my teens and my 20s, I could go into the gym, I could put all of those weights on the bar, I could pick it up and I could do whatever I wanted. And I would never pull a muscle, I would never feel anything tweak, and everything just felt good to go from the first moment I was in the gym. Now I'm in my 30s, my early 30s, I go into the gym, and if I just slap a load of weight on the bar and pick it up, my joints feel stiff, everything feels a bit cold, and I feel not too much in the target muscle, but I feel a lot in the tendons and a lot in the areas that I shouldn't. Now, I don't have to do much of a warm-up to fix that, but I do have to do a couple of warm-up sets to ease myself in, just so I don't pull a muscle. Now, when you get over the age of 50, those warm-up sets become doubly or triply as important, and you're going to have to do more. So every time you're working a new muscle in your workout, you must do at least 2 warm-up sets just to get your body ready for it. So that might mean if you're on a machine, you start off with about 1/3 of what you can normally lift. You do 15 repetitions. Then you go to 2/3 of what you normally lift. You might just do 10 reps just to kind of get a feel for it. And then you go to what you normally lift, do a couple of repetitions just to get you ready, and then you can jump into your working set. So warm-ups are super, super important, especially when we get over the age of 50. Now, the next point I've got for you is kind of further to that, and that's that everyone over the age of 50 should have an anti-injury routine that they do almost every workout. And that routine is going to differ from person to person. And what I recommend people do is they build the routine around their problem areas. So let's say you've had a hip injury in the past, you might do 3 glute activation exercises, you might do a stretch for your hips, and you do that every single time before you go and work out. And if you've had a rotator cuff injury, you might start by just gently mobilizing that shoulder, taking it through a full range of motion, then do a couple of sets of just rotator cuff warm-up exercises before you get onto the bench press or before you get onto those machines. And that's going to be your anti-injury program. It's going to be specific to you. I can give you some examples from my channel, but I can't tell you exactly what to do because you are different to me and I'm different to the next person. So figure out what your problem areas are and try and build a gentle routine to help avoid future issues. The next piece of advice I've got for you has to do with should you lift heavy or light weights? And there's a lot of controversy around this online. And for over 50s, the advice is actually different to people under 50 who are in their 20s and their 30s. So let's talk about the pros and cons of lifting heavy and light and what each one actually means. So for the purposes of today's discussion, if you lift light weights, what we're talking about here is a set, so a number of reps that you do before you put the weight down, of 11 to 30 reps. And what we mean here is that you're going to hit fatigue by the time you reach 11, 12, 13, 14, or up to 30 repetitions and you have to put the weight down. That's a light set. Now a heavy set is anything from 5, so a very heavy weight that you can only lift 5 times, all the way up to 10 repetitions. And in younger people, the research shows that it is very beneficial to lift heavy, and in controlled studies, the same results can be seen in heavy weights for older people as well. However, there are caveats. Let's first talk about how these two things work. So the research shows that both modalities will build muscle. So if your goal is to build muscle mass, you can lift anything from 5 all the way up to about 30 repetitions and still gain muscle. It doesn't really matter that much, providing your volume is correct and the amount of times you're going to the gym is well programmed, so you're not overtraining. Now, in terms of bone mass, which is another thing that's very important for people over 50, unfortunately, the heavier you lift, the more bone you put down, which means that the lighter you lift, the less bone you put down. And we don't really know if lifting weights at 20 to 30 reps is enough of a stimulus to increase bone mass. I haven't seen any papers that suggest it is, but I've seen a few papers that suggest that lifting heavy weights helps to lay down bone, especially in people who have osteoporosis and osteopenia. So that's just something to bear in mind, and it's a tick for the heavy column. Now, strength. So your maximal strength will of course get better if you lift heavy weights, not so much if you lift light weights. You'll still get some improvement, but not as much as in the heavy column. However, if we're just talking about getting up and out of a chair, climbing stairs, making sure you can pick up your grandkids, I would say that either of these is enough to build the strength that you need for that. Now, here is the very, very important row, and this is where we talk about injury risk. And injury risk with light weights is minimal, providing that your technique is good, you know what you're doing, someone's shown you how to do the exercise, you're golden. However, if you're lifting very, very heavy weights, even if your technique is excellent, you're still at a higher risk of injury. Now, don't get me wrong, if you do everything right, injury risk is still relatively low, but you are at higher risk of a tendon problem or a muscle tear or a joint sprain or just flaring up some existing arthritis, and none of these things are good. And as we explained, it takes a long time for someone in their 60s or 70s to recover from one of these things, which means that your risk in this is much more elevated. So that's a big tick in the light column. Now let's talk about recovery. Now, when you're young, when you're in your 20s, you can lift heavy weights 5 or 6 days of the week and you can still recover in time for your next session. But as you get older, that is not so much the case. Your recovery, where it did take 1 or 2 days, might now take 3 or 4 days. And that means you might not be able to get into the gym more than twice a week if you're just doing heavy weights, which means even though you're making good progress with your heavy weights, you're not making as much progress as if you were lifting light weights and you could go in more times. So with light weights, you have a shorter recovery, which means that you can hit the gym probably 4 or 5 times a week. You're not putting too much stress on your joints. The tendons aren't aching and feeling like they're about to pop, which means they're recovering in time for the next workout, which means you can probably get more work done with light weights. So those are the pros and the cons. Where does that leave us in terms of a recommendation? Well, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think you should do if you're trying to build muscle and strength. And here would be my recommendation to you. And that would be to usually shoot for 10 to 15 reps per set. Now, 10 to 15 reps per set is just slightly into that lightweight range, but you're still hitting 10 reps sometimes, which I would still classify as reasonably heavy. The research has shown that people training at 10 reps do still gain bone mass as well as muscle mass, so we've got a tick there. You are going to gain plenty of strength, enough to do all of the things you want to do without the risk of injury that comes with 5 or 6 rep really heavy sets. You're also going to recover on time, and that's going to mean you can get into the gym more and get better results. Now, I've also put here, feel free to work up to 20 to 25 reps sometimes. So if you feel like your joints are a bit sore, or you're doing some heavier leg press, you're doing sets of 10, and you can feel it kind of in your quads, but also in your knee, drop the weight down, make it much lighter, do 20 to 25 reps. I can almost guarantee that emphasis will come off your knee joint and more into your muscles, and that for you might be a more suitable rep range. But by default, I would shoot for this. If you're feeling joint pains or you're feeling like you're not recovering in time, then go up to 20 or 25 reps with a lighter weight. And doing that should mean you get the best results with the minimal risk of injury. Before we go any further, I just want to tell you about 3 Tip Friday. 3 Tip Friday is my weekly email that I send out to my list, and it features 3 of the most interesting things I've found that week. It could be a health tip, it could be a piece of research I'm reading, or it could be a new tool that I've found to be really useful for helping people get more mobile. It's totally free. I just send it out once a week. There's no annoying promos inside, and you can sign up for it by going down below this video and entering your email in the 3 Tip Friday link. The next thing I'm often asked about when it comes to building muscle and strength is it better to use weights like dumbbells, or is it better to use resistance bands? But the truth is, dumbbells and barbells work better for some exercises, and resistance bands work better for other exercises. So for example, if I was going to work my legs and I'd chosen to do an exercise called a goblet squat, which looks something like this, it's a great exercise for quads and hip strength, I definitely want to be using a heavy weight that I can hold for this, because it's very difficult to do that kind of movement with resistance bands. I guess if you wanted to do it with a resistance band, you could probably have it like this and do a squat like that, which is okay, but it's just not ideal. So for leg movements, I tend to use the free weights, but for upper body movements, resistance bands can be really, really good. So for example, if you wanted to build stronger shoulders, a great exercise with a resistance band is a lateral raise. And that looks something like this. You stand on the band here, and then you take it out to the side as high as you can, and then down again like that. And the beautiful thing about resistance bands is they have a changing curve of resistance throughout the movement. So when you're down here, there's less resistance. When you're up here, where the muscle's really engaged, you have more resistance, which means you have a continuous resistance of different levels all the way through the movement. Whereas if I'm doing that exercise with a weight, there's almost no resistance down here whatsoever because of the effect of gravity. But when you get up to here, you have more gravity, which means sometimes it's actually better to be using the bands than one of these. So use a combination, keep things interesting. You can always switch it up. I definitely use both types in my workout. If I'm in the gym, I will use a cable as opposed to a resistance band, which is just a more sort of controlled way of doing it, because you can move the pin to choose different weights, and that allows you to progress over time. The next question I'm often asked about building muscle and strength is how many sets per muscle group per week should you do? So for the avoidance of doubt, a set is a collection of repetitions that starts when you pick the weight up and stops when you put the weight down. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, I've done 5 reps, 6 reps, 7, and then 8. Let's say that was the hardest rep for me, I can't do any more. I put the weight down now, and that is 1 set of 8 reps. So that's how I would record it, okay? So that's a set. So how many of those sets do we need to do per week? Well, the research shows we should do about 5 to 15 sets per muscle group per week. So to clarify, a muscle group is a group of muscles that does the same action. So your chest and all of the muscles that make up this area is a muscle group. Your shoulders and all of the muscles that make up this muscle group is one group. Your biceps, they make up another one. Your triceps make up another. Your back, your upper back makes up a muscle group. The front of your legs and the back of your legs are 2 separate muscle groups, and you get the idea. So putting that together, that's a lot of exercise in a week. Now bear that in mind that this is for optimal results. This is not to make any change. This is to have the best possible change, okay? So you can get results with less, but if you want your results to be the best they possibly can be, you want to be shooting for those numbers. Now also bear in mind the fact that you can do exercises that work multiple muscle groups at the same time. So for example, if you chose a squat or a sit to stand as part of your program, that gives you a set for your quads, it gives you a set for your hips as well, and you could probably count it as a set for your core or maybe your lower back too, depending on where you feel it working. So this is one of the reasons why we want to choose what we call compound exercises. And compound exercises are simply exercises that work more than one muscle group at the same time. So a bench press is a compound exercise where you lie on your back and you push the bar, because you're working your chest muscle group and you're working the back of your arm as well, the triceps muscle group too. The next question that I'm going to answer that I often get asked is about rest periods and how long should you rest between sets in an exercise. So let's say that you've just done a set of 10 squats and you stop. How long should it be until you pick the bar back up again and do another set of 10? Well, I used to think it should always be about 90 seconds long. That's what I read in the textbooks, so I used to tell people that's about the right length of time. But now I know that isn't the case. And the amount of time you rest between sets wholly depends on what exercise you're doing and your fitness levels. So let's say, for example, I've done the squats. After 90 seconds, if I've really worked hard, I'm still puffing after 90 seconds. So if I was to pick the weight back up again and try again, I probably only get 6 reps for the second set. If I did 10 on the first one, I might only hit 6 on the second. So the thing that's limiting me is my lungs, not my legs. That means that my lungs might get stronger, but my legs probably won't. So if I'm squatting, I might take 2.5 minutes rest between sets. Now contrast that with the bicep curl. So the bicep curl is an easy exercise. It's an isolation movement. It only works one muscle group. And let's say I do a set of 10. I can't do any more. I put the weight down, I shake my arm off, and after about 45, 60 seconds, I'm ready to go again. And I can do another set of 10 repetitions. So for this exercise, I don't need 90 seconds rest, and I certainly don't need 2.5 minutes, and that would actually be a waste of time. So it depends on the exercise. The guide to use is how puffed you are and how ready you feel to do another set. And that might mean that you increase your rest periods as the workout goes on. When you're fresh, you might be able to get straight back into your second set. But when you're quite gassed, you're a bit tired, you might have to wait for longer. And it's absolutely okay to do that. Don't be tied to any one specific rest period time. And the final thing we're going to talk about today is protein. And it's impossible to build the optimal amount of muscle or strength without adequate protein intake. And there's a lot of controversy online about what the amount of protein is that we should be eating each day. So I've done the research for you, and this is what I found. The recommendations between different sources differ quite a lot. So government recommendations typically fall around this kind of level. So 1 gram of protein per kilogram of your body weight per day. Now, the research that I've seen says that this should be seen as an absolute minimum, and it's actually questionable whether this is enough to maintain your muscle mass, especially as we start to get over the age of 65 and 70, when sarcopenia starts to set in and muscle loss accelerates. So this is the bare minimum. I would probably suggest that you don't shoot for anything less than this, especially if your goal is to build muscle. And in fact, from the papers that I've seen, optimal muscle gain takes quite a bit more than that to occur. Roughly somewhere between 1.5 and 2 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight per day is about right if you want to gain muscle. And the sarcopenia research shows that that is also the optimal amount to shoot for if you want to limit sarcopenia and possibly reverse it. And the research papers I've seen actually recommend that the older you are, the higher you should be on this range. Because obviously as we get older, sarcopenia sets in more. When you get over the age of 75 to 80, it's happening rapidly. You might be losing more than 10% of your muscle mass every decade. So shooting for a higher level of protein intake provides your muscles with the amino acids they need, which basically are their building blocks. If we don't have amino acids in our body, then the body strips away muscle to provide them, which means we lose muscle mass over time if we're not taking it in through dietary protein. So this is what I would shoot for. Obviously check with your doctor to make sure that's suitable for you, but the research I've seen suggests that this is what we need if we want to build and maintain optimal muscle. So there you have it, my best advice for people over the age of 50 who want to build muscle and strength. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, do drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts, because it does help us to improve these videos in the future. And if you want to get more from me, you can pick up a copy of my book. It's called Thriving Beyond 50, and you can find it on Amazon using the link below. It's got loads more advice about how to build muscle and strength inside. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time, and I'll speak to you on the next episode.